Hello, welcome everybody to today's HR Huddle. It's December 12th, and I have a guest with me today that I'm so excited to introduce you to. It's Neile Martin, and she is the Chief People Officer at Yount Hyde Barber in Virginia. Wow, I'm messing that up. So she's with YHB in Virginia, and I've known Neile we've decided about 15 years, almost 16 years. And I've been doing a lot of leadership programs with her and different partner meetings and retreats. And it's just been so fun to, participate with the growth of YHB. But also, I thought it would be so great for Neile to come today and share what she has seen in her history in HR. She had 20 years of HR non-public accounting related, and then joined YHB 20 years ago. And she is planning her transition and her successor that will take over in 2023. So this 40-year career that she's had in HR, there's been a lot of things that's changed, a lot of lessons learned. And I thought, gosh, how great would it be for her to come and share her wisdom and insights. So thank you for being here, Neile. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Tamara. And actually, remember Maryland, Virginia, and Maryland now.
Well, and Maryland. That's right. We got to say Maryland now. Thank you for clarifying that. Right. That's because they've been expanding and growing and expanding their services and all these consulting and advisory services. I think that's probably one thing that's changed as well, along with all the remote and everything. And maybe that's where we start, today is, what do you think well, let's start with what's the biggest change that you saw going from what I'm going to call non-public accounting to accounting, and then let's talk about in accounting what you've seen change over the 20 years. So maybe we break it into those two, buckets. What do you think?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to start with that, and to expand a little bit on what you were saying, Tamara, at first. So I started my career really not as an HR professional. I sort of stumbled into HR. I was an undergraduate in psychology, and then I got my MBA. And in retrospect, that makes perfect sense. I wish I could say I took credit for planning it that way, but I didn't. And started my career really in an operations side of things, and was pulled from operations into an HR role in that organization, which was a very large organization. Wasn't public accounting. And so really, to your question, Tamara, one of the things that really was a wake-up call, I think, for me, was how different public accounting was 20 years ago. Flash forward to what we'll talk about where we are today, but from other industries that I had been involved in before.
Yeah.
And certainly that partnership model, that multiple owners. And, when I started, there were, I think, 11. Now there's 43. So, that comes with its challenges as well. So, really just the difference in really learning to acclimate. I think I'm not alone. And then a lot of HR professionals that come into public accounting have no experience in public accounting prior to that. And the transfer of skills in other industries, I did have a couple of different industry changes in my career early on. It was pretty transferable. But in public accounting, it really is a unique, not that it can't happen. It's a wonderful career. It's an industry, obviously, I've spent the past 20 years in, and I don't regret 1 second of it. So, but it is a unique industry.
Well, and I think that's such a good point, because I think every single firm that we have been talking to the last year, 18 months, if not longer, are expanding their HR function, either, finally hiring an HR manager or a director, or saying, what else do we need in that function, and growing that function. I know you've been growing it too. And they don't all come from public accounting or even professional services. That's nice, but the skills can be transferred, like you said. It's just understanding the business model, I think, is the biggest thing. I think for leaders and HR professionals, if you're looking to grow and expand your area, to think about the education that's required for working in multi-partner, multi-owner type of entity, and managing the priorities, and just the growth in the services, the client service focus, I think could be a bit different from many of the other industries.
Well, think about it this way too, Tamara. I think one of the things that occurred to me in sort of my latter years is, it's not as most of the people that are in public accounting are accountants, and that's not the case in other industries. You've got a little bit more diversity in terms of the different functional areas, and so it brings a different flavor to it.
Yeah.
But when you're skewed to, a large majority coming from the same kind of area of expertise, it takes some education on the part of the HR professional to educate that level or that particular function. What is HR anyway? Because
Right.
most of them don't really have a good insight into what it is. And that HR professional's role is really to educate. And I certainly have found that as a critical part of my role at YHB.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's, something to think about, as HR professionals, we want to be consultative and advisory, to our leaders, to our team members, about the different things that we can do in HR to focus on talent, focus on team, which is so critical today. New recruiting strategies, what else? I know you're involved in the systems a lot, HRIS and all of that. And, what should we be paying attention to? That we can bring back to the firm to educate them on, because they're not HR professionals. They're, hiring for that special expertise and that, advice and that strategic thinking, I think, is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things I think about, again, way back when making that transition in was to really, where it is an industry that for me on the outside coming in, having been in an industry, in the 90s and early 2000s where have laptop will travel, it was the norm, even though, my headquarters was in Boston, I was ultimately in Virginia. And I came in with this mindset that, these are a lot of individual contributors. There's a lot, this is an industry so conducive to that, but it was so not the history of
Right.
what public accounting had historically been. This physical presence in the office. If you're not in the chair, then you must not be productive. And, really would have expected that transition to have happened a little bit quicker than it actually has. However, I think we can all say that's one of the silver linings that came out of the pandemic, is that we
Yeah.
were all positioned well. Hopefully, we all had the technology in place, but there was still the mindset of you must be in the chair doing the work. Okay, it's a snow day, you can work from home, but the normal should be that you're coming to the office every day. And clearly, that's been the most significant shift, in a very positive one, that's
I
occurred
agree.
in the past couple of years.
Yeah, it accelerated, right? What it did is
Mhm.
it accelerated it and showed, hey, we can actually do this and we can pivot and change. I think the other thing that it showed us is we can pivot and change on a dime. It doesn't need to take us years and, numerous, meetings and examples and, et cetera, to, make a decision and drive a change. We showed how nimble we actually can be. And I know that's something, that a lot of HR professionals that we talk to is like, we want to drive this change, but it feels like it takes a long time. And I think, the pandemic has also demonstrated, hey, let's go try it. Let's just,
Sure.
make a decision and go try it.
And piggybacking on that too, I would say one of the other silver linings that came out of the pandemic was elevating the role of HR. I mean,
Yes.
I think we've always felt an expectation or the dependence, but I don't know about anyone else in how they experienced it within their firm, but all of a sudden everybody was outside the door looking at Neile going, what do we do? How do we do it? Help. And, certainly we're all navigating. None of us had ever been through anything like that before, but it certainly elevated and continues to really put HR at the table where it always should have been. And again, I think that's just one of the many silver linings that's come out of this pandemic and underscored how critical that role is in any organization.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we never really thought about safety first for our people. I mean, it was just kind of assumed or taken for granted or something. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, safety first, health first. And then, managing the support and the learning and the pivoting for online and, all of that. And we've completely had to shift. I think that's funny that they're, standing outside your door, right? Which really is your Zoom window, probably. And they were going, hello, what are we doing for talent now? We need to, elevate this and focus on it. So I think that's super important. What, when you think back, what do you wish you would have known earlier in your career that maybe somebody would have told you, or if you had some advice, to those maybe starting off, or maybe they're in the middle of the career, to pay attention to, now that you're looking at handing the baton to somebody else, what would you impart?
Well, certainly, I think early on when you're first starting, I think there's this expectation that you impose on yourself. I know I did myself, is that I had to know it all. I couldn't make mistakes. I probably shouldn't ask too many questions, or it'll make me look like I don't know what I'm doing. And that's certainly something that is not the case. And certainly, I'm still asking questions. I still don't know everything, and this many years into it. Um, the other I think is, and I think I'm an example of it, is that, you can change that journey anytime. I don't think, and I talk to plenty of young people, I'm sure, again, all the HR professionals that are listening in feel the same way, that, some professionals, some people just seem to know when they were 5 years old what they were going to do for the rest of their life when they grow up. I certainly wasn't one, and I think I went through a series of, very, very different occupations in my mind, and even in college, career paths. And as I said really early on this podcast, I sort of stumbled in and found that I had an affinity for things. So it's be open to what that journey might be, because it may not be what someone else said you should do or what seems like the right thing to do, and to be open for what that career might be, because I certainly never intended to go down the path that I am, and I couldn't be happier that that's the path I ended up on. And then I think finding an advocate. We know hard work pays off, but often it's necessary to really advance to have those people around the table that are advocating for you. So look for those advocates. Look for those opportunities. It's funny particularly when I'm talking to young people who are, or I hear from someone else, I don't think you should include, or maybe that'll make them uncomfortable. I said, what are you thinking? When I was younger, I wanted to get in front of the VP of everything, because I wanted to make sure they knew who I was and they knew what my name was. And again, that's where you end up finding those advocates, because
Yeah.
someone's going to connect and you're going to connect. And in the long run, that's extremely beneficial.
And you probably have some lifelong advocates from all different places in your points of your career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Again, even early on, to think about, when someone asked me, did I want to pursue this role, where it certainly wasn't something that I was pursuing on my own. But again, I was open to it. And this was someone who I respected. And I said, okay, I guess I could grow up to be like you someday. So let's give it a shot.
yeah. Well, and to your point about all the focus on talent the last few years,
Oh,
there's so much innovation happening in HR. I think in all of the firm, I mean, the entire part of the firm. I mean, we really in public accounting can create, the kind of career you want, the kind of service you want to give. But if you look at just HR, there's so many opportunities and so many areas, of specialty and expertise. And so what lights you up? And where is there a need that you see that the firm needs? And let's invent that. Let's create that and not be afraid because it hasn't existed before or it's not traditional. Let's go try that.
oh yeah. I think about, and people take different trajectories, obviously, in HR. I happen to be more of a specialist to start, training, recruiting, those types of silos, and ultimately ended up into a more generalist role. Sometimes it's usually the other way around, and then you find your specialty.
Yes.
So you want to test out those roles too, and know that they're, again, they're not all the same, and you may be more passionate about one than the other. But back to your point about new roles, I mean, think about it, in terms of, remote specialists, or, manager of hybrid workforce. I mean, there are so many, because the way we work has dramatically changed in the past couple of years. And that's just it's opened people's eyes to how change can be beneficial. And there's so much more that can happen with that just makes it's exciting. It's, on the one hand, if I have any regrets about, kind of coming to the end of my career, is darn, I'm going to miss those opportunities. There's some new HR areas that, are certainly of the future that really were not something that we focused on in the past.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much excitement, that so many options. So what do you hope for? Like if you were to say, gosh, if I were to, fast forward 10 years and you look at HR, what do you hope for the field of HR? What do you hope for HR in public accounting? What would you say that you could
Well,
wave your magic wand? What would that be?
I think it's on a great trajectory. So I hope that continues. We've seen over the years, when the economy shifts, or things of that sort, outside influences, can take away that. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I really just think the value's been there for a very long time, and just the exposure or the recognition of that value, not just at the top or just in the C-suite, but just across the firm, um, is not going to go away. So it's leveraging that, right? Deliver on that. Push off on the. I'm not a transactionist here. I'm not a transactional person. That's not my role. There are transactions that HR oversees and is responsible for to make sure they're happening, but it's much more of a strategic focus and a strategic role. And it needs to be at the table, just like every other strategic functional area in the organization, at making those key decision points, being part of future planning, part of workforce planning, all of the things that any organization is faced with in terms of current and future.
Yeah. The whole organizational development and doing that anticipation of, how should we be structured and what kind of new roles do we need and what kind of new ways of operating do we need to be embracing, and how does technology play into that? I mean, there's so many different layers, and I think you're, right on. I think 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009, the firms that did not take their foot off the talent pedal came out of that recession so much better off than those that made cuts, that minimized the investment in talent. And so I think, a lot of firms learned their lessons, back then. And as we've, tried to capitalize on all the growth that's happening, in the profession and all the client opportunity, along matched with our, talent shortage. And then the pandemic, even during the pandemic, firms are like, we got to stay the course with our people and with talent, peeking their head in the door, like you said, saying, hello, Neile, what are we going to do here? I think that is so important, that it's not a nice to have, where I think maybe, 15 years ago, it was kind of a nice to have or something we'll add later. It's now a strategic component of how we run our business.
Absolutely. And you piggybacked on Tamara too, because gosh, as we know, the talent shortage is particularly acute in this industry. And we just have to be creative about how we're going to address those challenges, because supply and demand is a very different scenario today than it was in prior years. Hopefully we can, there are some longer term efforts that will shift that, but for the short term, we've got to figure out creative ways through technology, through outsourcing, through whatever, to be able to do what we need to do to serve our clients.
Yeah. And that's something that, yes, it can come from the different service lines and practice areas, but that is something definitely that HR professionals can really drive and, recommend and show how it can work and oversee it in some cases. I think that can make a huge difference for the different practice areas and the firm, when the HR professionals are driving that.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly, kind of piggybacking, we didn't really talk about the team as a whole, but one of the things certainly that, you've experienced, being with YHB over the years is, how we've really created new roles even in HR within a firm, because we recognize there's other ways to, support versus, again, the more traditional HR functions of benefits and recruiting and things of that sort. We've even, even title changing, we've got 2 HR business partners that are clearly, that sends the message, it sets the tone for, that's why I'm here to partner with you for the success of this organization. What do we need to work together on to get there?
Yeah. That's a really good point. What are a couple of the other roles that you guys have developed? As you've expanded your HR function, as you guys have been growing, what have you added or how have you structured that?
Well, I'll go back even to square one. So when Neile joined YHB, Neile was a department of 1 and 4 offices and I think 70 people. And, here we are, flash forward to today, and we're a department of 6. So we have 2 HR business partners that, in addition to supporting sort of overall HR, employee relations, culture building, et cetera, and we're that many offices now that we had to divide it regionally. They also each have recruiting responsibilities, but they're different recruiting responsibilities because, again, I think I'm probably not telling anything that anyone on this call doesn't know, and you don't know, Tamara, is that there are two kinds of recruiting in public accounting. It's college recruiting and it's the campus recruiting, and what you have to do there in terms of relationships and activities and connections and networking. And then you have experience recruiting, which
Right.
is a very different animal. And I come from a long history of recruiting being part of my wheelhouse, something I enjoy doing, but it's something that, as the firm gets larger, is not something that really someone in my role, it's just too time consuming. So
Right.
we recognize that we needed solely individuals focusing on those two different functional areas. Then we have a training and learning manager we've had for a long, long time. That was actually the very first role that I added to the team way back when, probably 18 years ago, and started out in a more of a coordinator role, but it grew to a very expansive and very important training and learning role. And then we have an HR manager, but really that person is predominantly benefits
Yeah.
administration, because again, we're
Compliance.
very, very large,
Yeah.
leave management, so that type of thing
Yep.
is where they're managing that. So that's what we've grown to. And I suspect that, even after I leave, that will continue to grow as the firm grows
Yes.
in terms of needs.
Well, and I think that's a place that I know a lot of HR, leaders are looking at. How do we expand and where do we expand? So I think that's a really good, illustration of those focal areas. And experienced hire recruiting is a different skill set than the campus recruiting, different activities,
Absolutely.
different skill set. And then the learning and development is critical today. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I have one final question for you. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we talk to people about is, they're planning their retirement. They're looking at what's next. When I get my person on board here and they get, trained and developed, what is your possibilities list? So what are you going to do next? And what have you been dreaming about, or what might be on that possibilities list for you? Would you share a couple things?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I've always felt like there's going to be something next after.
Yeah.
Never really, as I get closer, the more I think. I mean, I have loved my career. I love the work that I do, and I feel I have a lot of knowledge to share. So, in some capacity, I would like to be able to share that knowledge, whether it be mentoring HR professionals or on a consulting basis, working with different organizations that need some help. So, but being able to drive it, from my end is, yeah,
Yes.
I can do that, or nope. In fact, I'm going to go on a trip next month, so I won't be available to help you with that. And that brings sort of the next things. I have two daughters who are grown adults but don't live in the area, so love to have more opportunity to spend time with them. Likewise, my husband, who is retired, and so we are advocates of lots of our outdoor activities. So whether it's kayaking or biking or going out on our new boat that we purchased this past summer, or he doesn't join me on the skiing adventures. That's my daughter, but I do still enjoy that too. And I kid about it. I did think as a young person that at some point in life, skiing got to be free when you got to be in your 70s or something. Well, that's certainly not happening anymore. I think that's because there's so many of us baby boomers who are pretty darn active into our 70s. I'm not quite there yet, but hoping to do that. And travel. Travel's always been something. So we've worked a lot. We spend a lot of time at work, and not having opportunities to do some of those other outlets. So I'm really looking forward to that, and really just having time to read. You
Mm,
know, so all of those
yeah.
things are on my bucket list.
Yes. Well, and you're such a learner. So that's the reading, and like what else is there happening in HR that you can continue to learn about
Mhm.
and be a part of, but on your own terms. I like that
Yeah,
definition. That's awesome.
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, it has been a privilege to be on this journey with you for so many years and with YHB, and see what you've grown and how you've contributed and just our friendship. So thank you very much. And thanks for coming and sharing, some of these ideas with other HR professionals and other leaders that, drop into our HR huddle. So I really appreciate it, Neile.
Absolutely, Tamara. So have I appreciated it too, because I think we all know on this that, we lean on each other. And, again, you've likewise been a great support and person to lean on when I've needed leaning.
Yeah.
And so hopefully the rest of the people on the call have other people they can lean on as well. And I'm always here to happy to help, and look forward to not really completely leaving
Yeah.
this profession when the time comes.
That's great. I look forward to that. All right. Well, Thank you all for coming today. We're going to have one more HR Huddle in 2022 next Monday. So you can plan on joining us then. And then we're going to take a hiatus over the holidays as we close our offices for a couple weeks. I hope your year-end planning and your holiday enjoyment and everything else you're trying to wrap up in December here is going well. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Neile. And we'll be back next week.